The starship descended through the thick, shimmering atmosphere of Cytherean Prime, its hull glowing faintly as it pierced the planet's golden clouds. Eli Voss pressed his face against the small window of the passenger cabin, his breath fogging up the glass. Below him stretched a landscape unlike anything he'd ever seen. Fields of bioluminescent flowers pulsed in rhythmic waves, and towering crystal spires jutted out of the ground like ancient monuments. It was beautiful, surreal, and just a little bit overwhelming. Eli adjusted the strap of his backpack, which was stuffed with snacks, gadgets, and souvenirs from Earth. He had saved for years to afford this trip, part of an intergalactic tourism package that promised the adventure of a lifetime. So far, all he'd done was sit through hours of safety lectures and fill out endless forms about galactic customs regulations. But now, finally, they were here. As the ship touched down at the Royal Spaceport, Eli felt a surge of excitement. This was it, the moment he'd been waiting for. He grabbed his bag, slung it over his shoulder, and joined the line of passengers disembarking onto the platform. The air outside smelled sweet, almost floral, and the sky above shimmered with hues of purple and gold. Giant holographic banners floated overhead, displaying images of the royal family alongside messages written in both Galactic Standard Script and English. "Welcome to Cytherean Prime, jewel of the Andromeda sector." "Wow," Eli muttered under his breath. "This place is insane." He followed the crowd toward the main terminal, where guides dressed in elaborate robes directed tourists to their respective shuttles. Eli found his group easily enough. They were the ones wearing matching neon green vests labeled Intergalactic Getaway Tour Group Number 42. Their guide, a cheerful alien named Zilna with 6 arms and skin that sparkled like glitter, greeted them warmly. "Welcome, travelers," Zilna chirped, her voice high-pitched and melodic. "Today, we will visit the magnificent royal palace of Cytherean Prime. Please remember to stay within designated areas, respect local customs, and avoid interacting with members of the Royal Guard unless spoken to directly. Now, let us begin our journey." Eli rolled his eyes but kept quiet. Rules were rules, after all, even if they sounded a little boring. Still, he couldn't help feeling a twinge of irritation. Why did aliens always have to be so uptight? The shuttle ride to the palace took less than 10 minutes, but it felt like stepping into another world entirely. The road wound through lush gardens, filled with plants that glowed softly in the dim light. Waterfalls cascaded down cliffsides, their streams catching the sunlight and scattering rainbows across the landscape. In the distance, the palace loomed. A colossal structure made of translucent blue stone that seemed to hum with energy. Its spires reached toward the heavens, and intricate carvings covered every surface, depicting scenes of ancient battles and celestial wonders. When they arrived, the tourists piled out of the shuttle, snapping photos and chattering excitedly. Eli hung back, letting the others go ahead while he adjusted the settings on his camera. He wanted to make sure he got the perfect shot of the palace gates before heading inside. As he fiddled with the lens, however, someone bumped into him from behind. "Watch where you're going, human," growled a deep, gravelly voice. Eli turned around to see a towering figure clad in gleaming silver armor. The man, or rather, the alien, was at least 7 feet tall, with sharp features and piercing red eyes. His helmet bore the crest of the Royal Guard, and his hand rested casually on the hilt of a plasma sword strapped to his side. This was Commander Zirk, one of the most feared warriors in the galaxy. "Oh, sorry," Eli said quickly, though his tone carried more sarcasm than apology. "Didn't mean to get in your way, big guy." Zirk narrowed his eyes, clearly unimpressed. "You should show more respect. This is sacred ground." Yeah, Eli replied, waving him off. "I'll try to keep my clumsy human ways in check." The commander didn't respond, but his expression darkened. Without another word, he turned and strode away, his cape billowing dramatically behind him. Eli watched him go, muttering under his breath, "What a jerk." Feeling annoyed, Eli decided to explore the palace grounds on his own. He wandered past groups of tourists gawking at statues and fountains, snapping pictures whenever something caught his eye. Eventually, he found himself standing near the entrance to the throne room, where Queen Lyria herself was scheduled to make an appearance later that day. Security was tight, with guards stationed at every corner. Eli leaned against a pillar, scrolling through the photos he'd taken so far. Most of them were decent, but none really captured the grandeur of the place. Frustrated, he sighed and looked up, only to realize that one of the guards nearby was watching him intently. It was Zerk again. Great, Eli thought. Just what I needed. Is there a problem? Zerk asked, his voice cold and clipped. Nope, Eli said, forcing a smile. Just enjoying the view. You're blocking the path, Zerk replied, gesturing toward the flow of people moving around them. Sure enough, a few tourists were giving Eli irritated glances as they tried to squeeze past. Fine, fine, Eli said, stepping aside. Happy now? Zerk didn't answer. Instead, he crossed his arms and stared down at Eli, his red eyes burning with barely contained disdain. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, without thinking, Eli reached into his pocket and pulled out a small bottle of hot sauce, one of the souvenirs he brought from Earth. It wasn't much, just a cheap plastic container with a cartoon chili pepper on the label, but it had come in handy during meals on the ship. Want some? Eli joked, holding up the bottle. It's spicy. Might loosen you up a bit. To his surprise, Zerk didn't laugh. Instead, his hand shot out and grabbed Eli by the wrist. Do not mock me, he snarled. Panic surged through Eli as he realized he'd gone too far. Before he could apologize, Zerk shoved him backward, causing him to stumble and drop the bottle. Hot sauce spilled everywhere, splashing onto Zerk's armored visor and dripping down the front of his chest plate. For a split second, everything went silent. Then alarms began blaring and guards rushed forward, weapons drawn. Eli froze, his heart pounding as he stared at the mess he'd made, and the furious look on Zerk's face. Oh no, he thought. What have I done? The alarms blared louder with each passing second, their shrill sound echoing through the grand halls of the royal palace. Tourists scattered in panic, some ducking behind pillars while others pressed themselves against walls to avoid the attention of the guards. Eli stood frozen in place, his wide eyes locked on Commander Zerk, who was wiping hot sauce off his visor with a gloved hand. The alien's red eyes burned with fury as he glared at Eli, who suddenly felt very small and very human. Do you have any idea what you've done? Zerk growled, his voice low and menacing. Eli swallowed hard. Spilled some sauce. Before Zerk could respond, two royal guards appeared at his side, their weapons drawn and pointed directly at Eli. One of them barked something in a language Eli didn't understand, but the tone made it clear they weren't inviting him for tea. Another guard grabbed Eli by the arm, pulling him away from the scene as more palace staff rushed in to clean up the mess. Wait. Hold on. Eli protested, struggling against the guard's grip. It was just a joke. I didn't mean. No excuses, Zerk interrupted sharply. Assaulting a member of the royal guard is a serious offense. You will face judgment. Eli's stomach sank. Assault. Judgment. All because of a little hot sauce. He glanced around desperately, hoping someone would step in and explain that this was all a misunderstanding. But the tourists were too busy taking photos or running for cover, and the guards showed no signs of sympathy. Within moments, Eli was dragged out of the throne room and into a dimly lit corridor that led deeper into the palace. The holding cell wasn't what Eli had expected. Instead of cold metal bars or damp stone walls, it was sleek and futuristic, with glowing panels lining the ceiling and floor. A translucent energy field blocked the entrance, shimmering faintly like water. Eli paced back and forth inside the small space, muttering to himself. This can't be happening, he said aloud. It's just hot sauce. How does that even assault? They're overreacting. He flopped down onto the bench built into the wall, burying his face in his hands. For the first time since arriving on Cytherian Prime, the reality of his situation hit him hard. This wasn't Earth. Here, rules were stricter, punishments harsher, and mistakes like his could cost him dearly. He replayed the incident in his mind, cringing at every detail. Why hadn't he just kept quiet? Why did he always feel the need to crack jokes when things got tense? As he sat there, lost in regret, a holographic screen flickered to life on one of the walls. It displayed a series of symbols and text written in Galactic Standard Script, followed by an English translation. Curiami. Assault on a royal guard. Huanishi me into optionens. Neural reprogramming / exile to the obsidian wastes. Eli's heart skipped a beat. Neural reprogramming sounded bad enough, like something out of a sci-fi horror movie. But exile to the obsidian wastes. That sounded downright terrifying. He remembered hearing snippets about the wasteland during the shuttle ride earlier. Apparently, it was a barren, desolate region filled with dangerous creatures and unstable terrain. No one survived long out there. Oh man, Eli groaned, slumping further into the bench. I'm so screwed. Hours passed, or maybe it was only minutes. Eli couldn't tell. Time seemed to stretch endlessly in the sterile confines of the holding cell. Just when he thought he might lose his mind, the energy field fizzled out, and 2 guards entered the room. They gestured for him to follow them without saying a word. Eli hesitated, then slowly got to his feet. Where are we going? He asked nervously. No response. The guards simply turned and walked away, leaving Eli no choice but to trail after them. They led him through a series of corridors until they reached a large chamber adorned with intricate carvings and glowing crystals. At the center of the room stood Queen Lyria herself, seated on a throne that seemed to float above the ground. Her presence was commanding yet serene, her silver hair cascading down her shoulders like moonlight. Beside her stood Commander Zerk, his expression unreadable. Eli gulped. "Your Majesty," he stammered, bowing awkwardly. I didn't mean to cause trouble. It was just a dumb prank. I swear, I'll never do anything like that again." Queen Lyria studied him silently, her piercing gaze making Eli feel like an insect under a microscope. Finally, she spoke, her voice soft but firm. "You are aware of the gravity of your actions, are you not?" "Yes, Your Majesty," Eli replied quickly. "I didn't know it was such a big deal. I thought it was just, well, funny. I didn't realize it would upset anyone." Zerk stepped forward, his armor clinking softly. "This is not a court jester act, human. The Royal Guard exists to protect the monarchy and maintain order. Any act of disrespect toward us is an act of defiance against the crown itself." Eli winced. "I get it now. Really, I do. I promise I won't make fun of anyone else while I'm here. Can we just call it a mistake and move on?" Queen Lyria exchanged a glance with Zerk before turning back to Eli. Unfortunately, justice cannot be so easily dismissed. However, she paused, leaning slightly forward. "There may be another path for you, a way to redeem yourself." Eli blinked in confusion. "What do you mean?" "The kingdom faces a threat unlike any other," the queen explained. "A group known as the Void Whisperers has been sabotaging our defenses and spreading chaos throughout the land. An ancient artifact, the Starlight Prism, was stolen recently, and its power is vital to combating this menace. Without it, we risk falling to ruin." Eli frowned. "Okay, but what does that have to do with me?" "You will retrieve the Starlight Prism," Zerk declared, his tone leaving no room for argument. "It is located deep within the obsidian wastes, guarded by hostile forces. If you succeed, your crimes will be forgiven. If you fail..." He let the sentence hang ominously. Eli's jaw dropped. "Are you serious? Send me into some death trap? What if I say no?" "Then you will face neural reprogramming. Zerk replied matter-of-factly. Eli stared at him, then at Queen Lyria, whose expression remained calm but resolute. There was no negotiating this. His choices were simple: go on a suicide mission to save himself, or stay and suffer a fate worse than death. Neither option sounded appealing, but at least the first gave him a fighting chance. "Fine," Eli muttered, crossing his arms. "I'll do it, but don't expect me to enjoy it." Queen Lyria nodded approvingly. "Very well. You leave at dawn. Prepare yourself, human. The obsidian wastes are unforgiving." With that, the audience ended. The guards escorted Eli back to his cell, where he collapsed onto the bench once more. As the adrenaline faded, exhaustion set in, and he found himself staring blankly at the glowing panels overhead. "Well," he whispered to himself, "this day just keeps getting better and better." The next morning came far too quickly. Eli was roused from a restless sleep by the sound of footsteps outside his cell. When the energy field deactivated, he saw Zilna, the cheerful six-armed tour guide, waiting for him. She handed him a small bag containing supplies, a canteen, a ration pack, and a map marked with the location of the Starlight Prism. "I volunteered to accompany you to the edge of the wasteland," Zilna chirped, her usual optimism muted by concern. "But beyond that, you're on your own." "Thanks," Eli said dryly. "That makes me feel so much better." They boarded a transport vehicle that took them to the outskirts of the palace grounds. From there, they traveled across the shimmering fields of bioluminescent flowers until they reached the border of the obsidian wastes. The landscape changed abruptly, transforming into jagged rocks, swirling sand dunes, and eerie black clouds that blocked out the sun. It looked every bit as deadly as Eli had imagined. As Zilna bid him farewell, she placed a tiny device in his hand. "This beacon will guide you to the temple where the prism is hidden. Good luck, Eli Voss. May the stars shine upon you." Eli watched her disappear into the distance, clutching the beacon tightly. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for what lay ahead. Whatever happened next, one thing was certain: he couldn't afford to mess up again. And with that, he stepped into the obsidian wastes, ready, or as ready as he'd ever be, to face whatever horrors awaited him. The obsidian wastes stretched endlessly before Eli, a desolate expanse of jagged rocks, swirling sands, and ominous black clouds that blotted out the sky. The air was thick with an eerie silence, broken only by the occasional howl of the wind or the distant screech of unseen creatures. Eli tightened his grip on the beacon Zilna had given him, its faint blue light pulsing rhythmically in his hand like a heartbeat. It was the only thing guiding him through this nightmare. He adjusted the strap of his backpack, which now felt heavier than ever. Inside were the meager supplies Zilna had packed for him: a canteen half filled with water, a ration pack of tasteless energy bars, and a small toolkit containing basic tools. He glanced at the map she'd provided, though it wasn't much help. The Starlight Prism was located deep within the ruins of an ancient temple, but the path to get there was marked only by vague symbols and cryptic notes. "This is insane," Eli muttered under his breath as he trudged forward. "Why did I even agree to this? Oh right, because the alternative was brainwashing." He shook his head, trying to focus. Complaining wouldn't change anything. If he wanted to survive and avoid neural reprogramming or exile, he needed to find that prism. But first, he had to make it through the wasteland alive. After hours of walking, Eli's legs ached and his throat burned from thirst. The terrain grew rougher with every step, forcing him to climb over sharp boulders and navigate treacherous ravines. Just when he thought he couldn't go any further, he spotted something unusual up ahead, a faint glow emanating from behind a cluster of rocks. Curiosity tugged at him. Maybe it was another traveler, or worse, one of the Void Whisperers. Either way, he needed answers. Cautiously, he approached the source of the light, keeping low to avoid detection. What he found surprised him. Sitting cross-legged near a makeshift campfire was a figure wrapped in tattered robes. At first glance, they looked human, but as Eli drew closer, he noticed subtle differences. Their skin shimmered faintly, and their eyes glowed a soft green. This wasn't just some stranded explorer. This was an alien. "Who are you?" Eli called out, his voice trembling slightly. The figure turned slowly, revealing a tired but kind face. "Dr. Kale," they replied in accented English. "And you must be the human sent here to retrieve the Starlight Prism." Eli blinked in disbelief. "How do you know about that?" Kale chuckled softly. "Word travels fast in these parts, especially when it involves the royal family. Now, sit down before you collapse. You look like you haven't eaten or rested in days." Reluctantly, Eli joined Kel by the fire. The warmth was a welcome relief against the biting cold of the wasteland. As he sipped water from his canteen, he studied the stranger. Kale didn't seem threatening. In fact, they radiated an aura of calm wisdom. Still, Eli couldn't let his guard down completely. "So," Eli began after a moment, "what's your story? What are you doing out here?" Kale sighed, staring into the flames. "I'm an exiled scientist. Once, I worked for the royal family, studying artifacts like the Starlight Prism. But when I discovered certain truths about the Void Whisperers, I spoke out against the monarchy. They didn't take kindly to dissent." Eli frowned. "Truths? Like what?" "The Void Whisperers aren't invaders from another dimension," Kale explained. "They're a splinter faction of the royal family itself. Centuries ago, they disagreed with the ruling monarch's policies and were banished to the wastelands. Over time, they became twisted by bitterness and revenge. The Starlight Prism was originally used to seal them away, but now that it's gone, they'd grown stronger." Eli stared at Kale, his mind racing. "Wait, so the royal family lied about all this? About who the Void Whisperers really are?" Kale nodded grimly. "It's easier to paint them as monsters than admit the truth. But enough about politics. Tell me, why did they send you to retrieve the prism? Surely they have trained soldiers for such tasks." Eli hesitated, then recounted the events leading up to his mission. The hot sauce incident, the judgment, and Queen Lyria's offer. By the end of his story, Kale was laughing quietly. "You assaulted Commander Zirk with condiments," Kale said, shaking their head. "Only a human would think of something like that." "It seemed funny at the time," Eli protested, his cheeks flushing. "Anyway, what's done is done. Now I need to get that prism back, or I'm toast." Kale leaned back, stroking their chin thoughtfully. "Perhaps I can help you. In exchange for safe passage back to the palace, once this is over." Eli raised an eyebrow. "You want me to vouch for you? After everything you just said about the royal family?" "I've paid my dues," Kale replied firmly. "Besides, someone needs to ensure the prism is used properly. Without proper guidance, even well-meaning people can cause more harm than good." Eli considered this for a moment. He didn't trust Kale completely, not yet, but having an ally in this hostile environment sounded better than going it alone. "Fine," he said finally, "but if you try anything funny, I'll use more hot sauce." Kale teased, smirking. "Don't worry, Eli. I'm on your side." With Cal's help, the journey became slightly less miserable. They traveled together, navigating the treacherous landscape with surprising efficiency. Kale knew shortcuts and hidden paths that Eli never would have found on his own. Along the way, they encountered several dangers: venomous plants, quicksand pits, and packs of snarling, wolf-like creatures. But Kel's knowledge and quick thinking kept them alive. One evening, as they set up camp near a rocky outcrop, Eli decided to ask the question that had been nagging at him since meeting Kale. "Do you think we can actually pull this off? Get the prism and make it back in one piece?" Kale paused, poking at the fire with a stick. "It won't be easy. The temple is heavily guarded, not just by creatures, but also by traps left behind by the ancients. and the Void Whisperers may already know we're coming. But yes, I believe it's possible. Whether it's probable." They trailed off, leaving the sentence unfinished. Eli groaned. "Great. Always leave me hanging. Why don't you?" Despite the odds, however, Eli found himself growing more determined with each passing day. He wasn't just doing this to save himself anymore. If what Cale said was true, if the Void Whisperers were victims of betrayal rather than pure evil, then maybe bringing back the prism could fix things, or at least start a conversation. Finally, after days of relentless travel, they reached the entrance to the ancient temple. Carved into the side of a massive cliff, it loomed above them like the mouth of a beast. Strange symbols adorned the stone walls, glowing faintly in the dim light. The beacon in Eli's hand pulsed faster, indicating they were close. "This is it," Cale whispered, their voice tinged with awe. "The resting place of the Starlight Prism." Eli tightened his grip on the beacon, his heart pounding. "Let's hope it's worth all the trouble." As they stepped inside, the temperature dropped sharply, and the air grew heavy with an almost palpable sense of foreboding. The interior of the temple was vast and labyrinthine, filled with crumbling statues and intricate carvings. Shadows danced across the walls, cast by flickering torches that seemed to ignite on their own. "Stay alert," Cale warned. "We're not alone." No sooner had they spoken than a low rumble echoed through the chamber. From the darkness emerged a massive biomechanical creature, its body composed of metal plates fused with organic tissue. Its eyes glowed red, and its claws scraped against the floor as it advanced toward them. Eli froze, his mind blank with terror. But any bright ideas? Cale grabbed a nearby torch and hurled it at the creature, buying them precious seconds. "Run." They sprinted deeper into the temple, dodging collapsing pillars and narrowly avoiding falling debris. The creature pursued them relentlessly, its roars shaking the very foundations of the structure. Just when it seemed like they were cornered, Cale spotted a narrow passageway hidden behind a fallen statue. "In here," they shouted, pulling Eli inside. The passageway led to a smaller chamber, where the Starlight Prism rested atop a pedestal. It was a crystalline object, no larger than a fist, radiating a soft, otherworldly light. Eli hesitated for a split second, then grabbed it. "Got it," he exclaimed triumphantly. But their victory was short-lived. The ground beneath them began to tremble, and the walls started to collapse. The creature smashed through the doorway, blocking their exit. "Now what?" Eli yelled, clutching the prism tightly. Cale grinned, pulling a small device from their pocket. "Now we improvise." With a flick of a switch, the device emitted a high-pitched frequency that caused the creature to stagger and collapse. Seizing the opportunity, they bolted for the exit, narrowly escaping as the temple crumbled behind them. Once outside, they collapsed onto the ground, gasping for breath. The prism still glowed brightly in Eli's hand, a symbol of hope and survival. "Well," Cale said between pants, "that went better than expected." Eli laughed weakly. "Yeah, let's not do it again anytime soon." Little did they know, their journey was far from over. The real challenge lay ahead, returning to the palace and confronting the truth about the Void Whisperers and the royal family. The sun had long since vanished behind the thick, swirling black clouds that blanketed the obsidian wastes. Eli Voss and Dr. Cale trudged through the barren landscape, their footsteps crunching against the jagged rocks and dry, cracked earth. The Starlight Prism was safely tucked inside a protective case in Eli's backpack, its faint glow casting eerie shadows on the ground as they moved. Despite their success in retrieving the artifact, neither of them felt any sense of relief. The journey back to the palace promised to be just as dangerous, if not more so, than the one that brought them here. Cale led the way, their glowing green eyes scanning the horizon for signs of danger. They carried a makeshift staff topped with a shard of crystal that emitted a soft light, illuminating their path. Eli followed closely behind, clutching his flashlight tightly. Every sound, the rustle of the wind, The distant screech of unseen creatures made him jump. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. "So," Eli said after a while, breaking the oppressive silence, "what happens if the Void Whisperers find us before we get back?" Cale glanced over their shoulder, their expression unreadable. "Let's hope it doesn't come to that." "That's not exactly reassuring," Eli muttered under his breath. "It wasn't meant to be," Cale replied sharply. "The Void Whisperers are no ordinary foes. They're cunning, ruthless, and desperate. With the prism in our possession, we've made ourselves a target. If they catch us..." Cale trailed off, leaving the rest unsaid. Eli swallowed hard. Got it. No pressure or anything. Despite Cale's warnings, the first few hours of their return journey passed without incident. The wasteland stretched endlessly around them, bleak and lifeless save for the occasional twisted tree or skeletal remains of some unfortunate creature. But as night fell, the temperature plummeted, and the winds picked up, howling like banshees across the desolate plains. "We need to find shelter," Cale announced suddenly, stopping in their tracks. "This storm will only get worse." Eli squinted into the darkness, trying to make out anything resembling cover. "Shelter? Out here? Are you sure there's even?" "There." Cale pointed toward a cluster of boulders partially buried in the sand. Beyond them, the faint outline of a cave entrance became visible. Without waiting for Eli's response, Cale hurried toward the cave, their staff lighting the way. Eli followed reluctantly, his mind racing with worst-case scenarios. What if the cave was already occupied by something far more dangerous than the cold? Still, he knew better than to argue. Cale seemed to know what they were doing, at least most of the time. Inside the cave, the air was damp and musty, carrying the faint scent of sulfur. Cale used their staff to illuminate the space, revealing walls covered in ancient carvings similar to those they'd seen in the temple. Eli shivered, though whether from the chill or the unsettling atmosphere, he couldn't tell. "This place has been here for centuries," Cale murmured, running their fingers over the carvings. "It might have been a refuge for travelers or prisoners." "Great," Eli said sarcastically. "Just what I wanted to hear." Cale ignored him, setting down their pack and rummaging through it. "We'll rest here until the storm passes. Keep your voice down. Sound carries in caves like this." Eli nodded, sitting cross-legged on the cold stone floor. He pulled out the protective case containing the starlight prism and stared at it thoughtfully. Its glow pulsed gently, almost rhythmically, as if alive. "Do you think it knows we're trying to help?" he asked quietly. Cale glanced at him, raising an eyebrow. "Help? You mean returning it to the royal family so they can use it to suppress the Void Whisperers again?" Eli frowned. "Isn't that why we came all this way? To stop them." "To control them, you mean," Cale corrected. "The prism isn't a weapon, Eli. It's a key, a tool meant to maintain balance between light and shadow. When the royal family sealed away the Void Whisperers, they disrupted that balance. And now, the consequences are catching up to them." Eli sighed, rubbing his temples. "You really don't like the royals, do you?" "It's not about liking or disliking them," Cale replied. "It's about truth. They've perpetuated lies for generations, twisting history to suit their needs. If they reclaim the prism without understanding its true purpose, they'll only deepen the cycle of conflict." Eli opened his mouth to respond but stopped when he heard a low growl echo through the cave. His heart skipped a beat. "Did you hear that?" Cale froze, their hand instinctively reaching for the staff. "Stay quiet." The growl came again, louder this time, accompanied by the sound of claws scraping against stone. Something was approaching, and it wasn't alone. "Get ready to run," Cale whispered urgently. Before Eli could react, a pair of glowing red eyes appeared in the darkness, followed by another pair and another. Dozens of creatures emerged from the shadows, their forms hunched and wolf-like, with razor-sharp teeth and matted fur. Their eyes locked onto Eli and Cale, hunger radiating from every movement. "Oh no," Eli breathed, scrambling to his feet. "What do we do now?" Kale raised their staff, the crystal shard at its tip glowing brighter. "Follow my lead." With a deafening roar, the creatures charged. Kale swung their staff in a wide arc, releasing a burst of energy that sent several of the beasts flying backward. Eli fumbled for the flashlight, shining it directly into the eyes of the nearest attacker. The creature yelped and retreated, temporarily blinded. "Nice thinking," Kale shouted, spinning around to face another wave of attackers. Eli ducked as one of the creatures leaped at him, narrowly avoiding its snapping jaws. He grabbed a loose rock from the ground and hurled it at the beast, striking it squarely in the head. It stumbled, giving him enough time to scramble away. The battle raged on, the cave echoing with snarls and shouts. Just when it seemed like they were outnumbered, Kale activated another device hidden in their sleeve. A high-pitched frequency filled the air, causing the creatures to writhe in pain and retreat into the shadows. Panting heavily, Eli collapsed against the wall, his hands trembling. "Remind me never to piss you off." Kale smirked faintly, though their expression remained tense. "That won't be necessary. Now, let's move before reinforcements arrive." They left the cave as quickly as possible, the storm outside having calmed slightly. The moon peeked through gaps in the clouds, casting an ethereal silver light over the wasteland. For a brief moment, Eli allowed himself to hope that the worst was behind them. But fate had other plans. As they neared the edge of the wasteland, a massive shadow descended from the sky, blotting out the stars. Eli looked up, his blood running cold. Hovering above them was a sleek, black spacecraft shaped like a predator's claw. Its surface shimmered with dark energy, and its engines roared like thunder. "The Void Whisperers," Kale whispered, their voice heavy with dread. A beam of light shot down from the ship, landing mere feet away from Eli and Kale. From within the light stepped a figure cloaked in flowing black robes, their face obscured by a mask etched with intricate patterns. Behind them stood several armored guards, their weapons trained on the intruders. "You have something that belongs to us," the figure said, their voice echoing unnaturally. "Hand it over, and perhaps we'll spare your lives." Eli tightened his grip on the backpack, his mind racing. Handing over the prism would doom Cytherian Prime, but fighting these people was suicide. He glanced at Kale, silently pleading for guidance. To his surprise, Kale stepped forward, lowering their staff. "Wait," they said calmly. "There's more to this than revenge. Let us explain." The figure tilted their head, intrigued. "Speak quickly. Your time is short." And so, Kale began to recount the truth about the prism, the royal family, and the betrayal that had created the Void Whisperers. As they spoke, Eli noticed subtle changes in the figure's posture. Their grip on their weapon loosened, and their stance shifted ever so slightly. When Kale finished, the figure removed their mask, revealing a face both human and alien, marked by scars and wisdom. "If what you say is true," they said slowly, "then the fault lies not with the prism, but with those who wield it." Eli exhaled sharply, realizing they might actually survive this encounter. But the figure wasn't done yet. "Take the prism to the palace," they continued. "Confront Queen Lyria with the truth. If she refuses to listen, then we will decide our next move." With that, the figure signaled their guards, and the ship ascended into the sky, disappearing into the clouds. Eli turned to Kale, his expression incredulous. "Did we just negotiate with terrorists?" Kale smiled faintly. "Not terrorists, Eli. Revolutionaries." As dawn broke over the horizon, Eli and Kale finally reached the border of the obsidian wastes. Ahead lay the shimmering fields of bioluminescent flowers, and beyond them, the towering spires of the royal palace. The hardest part of their journey was still to come, but for the first time, Eli felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, they could change the course of history. The journey back to the royal palace felt surreal. Eli Voss and Dr. Kale walked in silence, their footsteps muffled by the soft glow of bioluminescent flowers that lined the path. The starlight prism rested securely in its protective case, pulsing faintly with an otherworldly light. Despite the beauty surrounding them, neither of them could shake the weight of what lay ahead. They were about to confront Queen Lyria, and the truth she had worked so hard to bury. As they approached the palace gates, a squadron of royal guards emerged, their weapons drawn and their expressions grim. Commander Zerk was among them, his red eyes narrowing as he spotted Eli. "You're late," he growled, stepping forward. Eli raised his hands defensively. "Yeah, well, getting chased by biomechanical monsters and shadowy rebels tends to slow you down." Zerk's gaze shifted to Kale, lingering on the exiled scientist for a moment before returning to Eli. "Hand over the prism immediately." "Not until we speak with Queen Lyria," Kale interjected firmly. "This concerns her directly." The commander hesitated, clearly torn between duty and curiosity. Finally, he gestured for the guards to lower their weapons. "Very well. Follow me." The throne room was as grand and intimidating as Eli remembered. Queen Lyria sat atop her floating throne, her silver hair cascading like moonlight and her expression unreadable. She watched silently as Eli and Kale entered, flanked by guards. Behind her stood Commander Zerk, his hand resting on the hilt of his plasma sword. Eli stepped forward nervously, clutching the protective case containing the starlight prism. "Your Majesty," he began, bowing awkwardly. "We've retrieved the artifact, but there's something you need to hear first." Lyria raised an eyebrow, her voice cool and measured. "Speak." Kale took a step closer, their glowing green eyes meeting the Queen's piercing gaze. "Your Majesty, the Void Whisperers are not invaders from another dimension. They are your own people, descendants of those banished centuries ago for opposing the monarchy. The starlight prism was used to seal them away, creating a cycle of suffering and resentment that continues to this day." A murmur rippled through the assembled guards, but Lyria remained impassive. "And how do you know this?" "I was one of the scientists who studied the prism," Kale replied without hesitation. "I uncovered the truth during my research, but when I tried to share it, I was exiled. You silenced me because the truth threatened your authority." The room fell silent. All eyes were on the Queen, waiting for her response. For a long moment, she simply stared at Kale, her expression unreadable. Then she turned to Eli. "Is this why you brought them here? To accuse me of deception?" "No," Eli said quickly, shaking his head. "Well, kind of. But also because the Void Whisperers let us go after hearing the same story. They're willing to negotiate, if you're willing to listen." Lyria leaned back in her throne, her fingers tapping thoughtfully against its armrest. "Negotiate? With traitors?" "They're not traitors," Kale countered sharply. "They're victims of betrayal. If you reclaim the prism without addressing the root cause of this conflict, the cycle will only repeat itself. Worse, it could escalate into full-scale war." Commander Zerk stepped forward, his tone harsh. "Enough of this nonsense. The Void Whisperers are criminals who have attacked our kingdom repeatedly. Mercy is wasted on them." "That's where you're wrong," Eli interrupted, surprising even himself with his boldness. "They attacked because they had no other way to be heard. If you keep treating them like monsters, they'll act like monsters. But if you give them a chance..." He trailed off, realizing how naive he sounded. To everyone's surprise, Lyria chuckled softly. "You humans truly are fascinating. So idealistic, even in the face of overwhelming odds." Her amusement faded, replaced by a steely resolve. "Very well. Bring the leaders of the Void Whisperers to the palace. We will discuss terms." The negotiation took place in the palace's grand hall, transformed into a neutral meeting ground. On one side sat Queen Lyria and her advisors, including Commander Zerk, whose scowl deepened with every passing minute. On the other side stood representatives of the Void Whisperers, led by the scared figure Eli and Kale had encountered in the Obsidian Wastes. Tensions ran high, But both parties listened intently as Kale mediated the discussion. The prism must remain unclaimed by either side, Kale explained, holding up the artifact. Its purpose is to maintain balance, not domination. By working together, you can restore harmony to Cytherian Prime. After hours of heated debate, a fragile agreement was reached. The Void Whisperers would return to society, granted autonomy in exchange for renouncing violence. The prism would be safeguarded under joint custody, ensuring neither faction could misuse its power. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. When the meeting concluded, Eli found himself standing alone in the palace gardens, staring up at the shimmering night sky. The events of the past few days replayed in his mind, leaving him both exhausted and exhilarated. He hadn't expected to change the course of history when he signed up for an intergalactic vacation. But here he was. "You did well," a familiar voice said behind him. Eli turned to see Commander Zerk approaching. His usual stoic demeanor softened slightly. In his hand, he held a small vial of alien hot sauce, its label printed in galactic standard script. "Consider this a token of respect," Zerk said, handing it to Eli. "Though I suggest using it wisely." Eli accepted the gift with a mix of amusement and apprehension. "Thanks, I guess. Does this mean we're cool now?" Zerk smirked faintly. "Don't push your luck, human." Before Eli could respond, Kale joined them, their glowing eyes twinkling with mischief. "So, what's next for our accidental hero?" Eli shrugged, smiling despite himself. "I don't know. Maybe find a planet where I won't accidentally start a revolution." Kale laughed softly. "Good luck with that." As they stood there beneath the stars, Eli realized something important. His impulsive decision to assault Commander Zerk with hot sauce, a moment of sheer idiocy, had led to the adventure of a lifetime. More than that, it had taught him valuable lessons about courage, responsibility, and the power of truth. With a final glance at the palace, Eli boarded the shuttle that would take him back to the starship bound for Earth. As the craft lifted off, he gazed out the window at the shrinking form of Cytherian Prime, its spires glimmering like jewels against the vast expanse of space. "Well," he murmured to himself, "that was definitely memorable." And with that, Eli Voss set his sights on the horizon, ready for whatever adventures awaited him next.